You're listening to the Presence Pioneers podcast. Well, has God called you to be a pioneer? Has He called you to go where no one's gone or do what no one else has ever done before? And how would you know? And if you're in that situation right now, how do you navigate the unique calling and purpose God has for you? Those are some of the topics we're going to be diving into today. After it all, it is the Presence Pioneers podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Lilley, and I've got special guest, Dr. Faith Wokoma, with us today. And before we dive in to the conversation with her, just want to welcome you. Those of you who are part of the podcast family, thank you so much for joining in with us, following along, sharing, subscribing, commenting, emailing, all the things you do to interact with us and show your support. We really appreciate that. And if you're new to the podcast today, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. We really want to help people experience and host God's presence because we believe God's presence changes everything. So if you're passionate about worship, prayer, revival, missions, unity, these are some things that are burning in our hearts. You found the right podcast, so be sure to hit subscribe or follow wherever you're tuning in today. Dr. Faith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to finally be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you are the founder of Ask Dr. Faith, which is your business. I know you're a coach, advisor, strategist. I'm kind of reading your bio here. You work with nonprofits, religious organizations, really to help people flourish, help people succeed. And I know you and your husband, Saboma, also planted Legacy Center Church there in kind of the Raleigh area of North Carolina. So you've been pioneering. It's awesome. I think you and I met, if I remember correctly, through our mutual friend, Mike Thornton at some point. And my family was there in the Raleigh-Durham area for a couple of years, and we got to do some interactions with having you guys and your worship team come lead worship at some events. And I got to go to some of your trainings that you were doing and that kind of thing. And so it's so great to finally get you on the podcast here.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And I don't know if you remember this, but my husband went to ECU. So we were in Greenville for a little bit. And so at that point, you were leading the house of prayer there. So we did come to one or two sets. I think that was the earliest. And then you guys moved towards this way. And so it's been good to know you guys for this long.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe just introduce yourself. Some people will know who you are, but some people won't. So just tell us a little bit about some of your story and your ministry.
Yeah, so once again, thank you. When you get this question, you're like, which angle do I go? But I'll just start with, I'm a mom, so I have two children, 11 and 9, and of course, I'm married. A little backstory, I came to the Lord at 5 at a Reinhard Bonnke crusade. I always love sharing that, but I came into the gospel with just an awareness of the supernatural and the presence of God. And early on, 8, 9, just started having these encounters with the Lord. The leadership stuff, I didn't know what it was, but 15, 16, 17, just kind of leading different groups at school and helping lead the youth ministry and all of that. At about 15, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist, so I did my undergraduate in psychology. And the funny story is because I studied Freud and he was talking about dreams, and I thought that's how you interpret dreams. Well, I learned there's a better way to do it. So did undergrad, did my clinical psychology degree at Regent after that. And then after that, God was like, you're going to work for me. And so then I went on a journey of trying to figure what that looked like. And that's where ADF, Ask Dr. Faith, was kind of birthed. My passion was really, inner healing, a little bit of deliverance, but walking people through the journey of dealing with your past so you can step into your future. And I was thrusted into the business world, online entrepreneurship, and kind of grew in that. And then about 2 years into that, the Lord really laid it on our heart to plant a church because a lot of the people that we were mentoring and coaching were like, if you guys had a church, we would come. And we didn't want to. And, God, all these signs. And finally we said yes. And it's been wonderful.
Yeah. How many pioneers have said, I don't really want to do this. And God says,
Mhm.
yep, this is what you're called to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always leery of people who are like so excited, when they feel like they're like, "Ah, are you sure?" You need to have a holy reverence and a little bit of, not necessarily anxiety, but just a good fear about what you're stepping into.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Count the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So one of the things, obviously we're the Presence Pioneers podcast, so we're passionate about the presence of God,
Yeah.
and we also believe that God's wanting to raise up those who have the heart like David, who will create places for His glory, His presence, His kingdom,
Yeah.
wherever they are. For you, what role has worship and
Mm.
prayer and the presence of God played? I really want to get into the pioneering stuff, but let's
Yeah.
start with the presence stuff
Yeah.
because I know that you're a passionate
Yeah.
worshiper, and we're even a worship leader in previous seasons. And so, like, how did that passion develop in you, and what role has that played in your ministry?
I love that question. And I love worship. Absolutely love it. So, yeah, just once again, I feel like a lot of times God is preparing us even from the time that we're really young, and the big picture comes together early, right? So, just
Mm,
loved musical, started singing when I was 8, playing the violin, and then getting into high school, just being part of musicals and doing all these different things, just loved any opportunity to sing. It wasn't until I got to college where I went to a historically black college with all women. So I always joke and say most of them
okay.
could sing, right? And so
Sure.
I'm in there and I'm just like, but I don't sound like everybody else. I'm like, Lord, what is it that you're doing with my voice? And the Lord, the first ever prophetic word I ever got, I had not gotten a prophetic word until I was 19. We grew up in a Missionary Alliance church, which was amazing, Bible based. And then we were part of a missionary Baptist church when we moved from Pittsburgh to North Carolina. And now I was in a church that called it Full Gospel, but they were literally in revival. The presence of God was falling. I got filled with the Holy Spirit. And the first ever prophetic word I got was, "You were made for worship." And I
Mm,
was like, okay. And so then that put me on a journey to start exploring what that meant for me. And I realized, I think being born in Africa and just having a passion for diverse sounds, that it wasn't going to be like a normal gospel singing trajectory that's expected of maybe a black female, right? The Lord was taking all my years of different experiences and weaving it into a sound. And so when I got to Regent, this was the time of Jason Upton and Adam Cates. And, Adam Cates used to host worship at his house, and so that was just
yeah.
really a time of developing a sound and what that felt like. And really, it's been my joy to kind of introduce prophetic worship and just really singing out of your heart and what God is saying over people, to a people that are amazing singers, but generally stick within kind of like a confounds and a structure. So our church worship culture has also been built on that. We do 2 songs, but in between, there's a lot of free flow and a lot of prophetic singing, and worship.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Mhm.
that. When you guys would bring your worship teams to the burn gatherings we would
Mhm.
do, people were always so expectant. It was
Mhm.
such a unique sound, such
Mhm.
a unique expression.
Yeah.
I would say there was a warfare dimension to
Mhm.
it as
Oh, yeah.
well. There's like an aggressiveness to it.
Yes. Yes.
In the
Yeah.
spirit that was really cool as well. And
Mhm.
I think that speaks to something I was going to ask you about later, but I'll just go ahead and mention now. I really appreciate the way you've gleaned from so many different streams in the body of Christ. And even we were talking about earlier before we hit record about how you're just pulling from business principles and how does that apply to the church and
Mhm.
things like that. I'm curious, where did that
Yeah.
come from in you? Just that desire or interest in kind of most people kind of find their lane and stay in it, but you're like all over the place in a
Yeah.
really cool way.
Yeah. That's a really good point, right? Because I thought, an undergrad and college, I'm thinking, I'm going to get out of school. I'm going to be a minister. God called me at 15. I knew that I was called to ministry, and I was just going to own maybe a therapeutic center of some sort. And one thing that I've noticed that's really cool is when you're yielded, God can really unfold what he wants for you, even if it's never been done before. So when, God was saying, you're going to work for me, and I'm like, okay, I have these ginormous school loans. I have a whole doctorate. This is not like I just went to an undergrad. So what is this going to look like? And I think, being in that place required a bit of innovation. And so I just had this inquisitiveness and all of this I guess searching to figure out how God gives you a prophetic word, but he doesn't always give you the process, right? And so it's
Right.
your job to go on that journey to discover exactly what he's saying. And so on the business end, that's what it was. I was looking for prototypes. I was looking for people who were doing what I thought I was going to do. And I would find some that were almost there, but not just likely it. And so I just kind of stepped into it. I've never had anyone tell me what I could not do, right? Like I just, maybe they did, but I didn't hear it. And I think those are trademarks of pioneers. I think it's trademarks of apostolic people, that they kind of just really focus their eyes on the Father and what he's saying. So as I started business, I didn't realize I was as good of a teacher as I am, right? I thought, okay, I'm going to counseling and, coaching and all of that. But the teaching gift really rose up when I stepped out. It wasn't very clear until I said yes.
Right.
And that helped really shape that business end. And then within the business, of course, for those that are in small businesses, they say niche down. That's the best way to grow your audience. Uh, but I was like, I'm not just a business owner. I'm a preacher. I'm a prophet first, right? And that is my assignment. And I didn't want to do something for a marketing tactic. I wanted to do what God was saying to do. And in some ways, I think that maybe has hindered our growth. God has done amazing things, but I couldn't just get with, I'm just going to teach on one topic because this is what the marketing experts do. Like, I'm going to do what the Lord told me to do.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it has evolved to being multiple lanes.
Hmm. I never thought about the relation between that curiosity or even that tendency and pioneering. But
Yeah.
the truth is, you're right. It's like if you got to do something
Yeah.
that's different, you go, well, I like a little bit of what they're doing, a little bit of what they're doing, a little bit of what they're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can kind of try to experiment and figure out how to put it
Mm-hmm.
together in order to move forward with what God's given you to do.
Yeah.
And I've found myself doing very similar things over the years with ministry where I go, well, kind of like that, but not quite, and kind of like that, but not quite. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, for some reason, I've never made those connections before. So that's fascinating. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So you guys, I know you have a gathering called the Pioneers
Mm-hmm.
Gathering or Pioneers
Yes.
Conference.
Yes.
And so was that just recently
Yeah.
you
It's
hosted your
perfect.
last one? How did that go?
It was phenomenal. I was really happy about this one because when it comes to events, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my internet, but if I glitch in, I'm going to come back in. But when it comes to events or conferences, so part of my passion in the kingdom is just reconciliation. I believe that the bride of Christ is multicultural and all of that. So trying to get different voices in a room, it sometimes works out really great, and sometimes you can't get all the voices. So this last one was really great. We had some amazing speakers from all different streams, and it was good. And it wasn't always the Pioneers Conference. When I started ministry at 25, I got this prophetic word that I was a Deborah, and I kept getting that word, which most prophetic women get. But I decided to do a study, and so out of it came worship, warfare, and leadership. That's what Deborah was all about. So it started out as warring women, and then the men were like, "Well, what about us?" Because they were hanging out, they were helping us, and so we just moved it to warring ministries and would have different conferences. But then
I
when I
remember
met
that. Yeah.
my husband, yeah, when I met him and we got married, we're like, you know what? We love leadership. We love developing pioneers, and so it's been the Pioneers Conference for the last 9 or so years, and it's just to give people language on how to dominate in whatever sphere of influence they're called to.
Love it. All right.
Mhm.
So let's get into it a little bit with the pioneering here. What would you say are some signs, maybe indicators? I think you mentioned one or two
Mhm.
earlier already, but what are some that maybe God is calling someone to be a pioneer, to
Yeah.
launch something, to start something? to go? I like to say, go where no one's gone or do what no one's done before.
Yeah, I love that question. I would say you seem ahead of the times, right? And so you have ideas, you have thoughts that sometimes people feel like, where are you getting that from, or is that even really possible? I think you try to fit in, but it's very difficult for you to fit in. You try to go with the norm, but you are made to really go upstream. I think you have a quick bounce back when it comes to things like rejection, and there's not this huge fear of man thing when you look at apostolic people, when you look at pioneers. I think that you have great resilience when somebody is a pioneer. They know how to bounce back and keep going, and they're very futuristic. They're always thinking about the future, what's coming, what is it going to look like. So those are the six or so that I can think of right at the off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Mhm.
Ha- This might be an interesting question, but I know you're kind of also in psychology, so it's a
Mhm.
perfect question for you. How much of this is like personality? You
Mhm.
know, because I love all the different kind of personality types and
Yeah.
different, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
How much of this is sort of like people's personality tendencies? Because you kind of have like entrepreneurial
Yeah.
people that just want to start things and do new things. I mean,
Hmm.
how much of this is personality? How much of this is sort of God's grace? Because sometimes God calls us to do things that
Yeah.
are outside of what seems to be our natural giftings. So how does all that work out, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that God wires you from your mother's womb with your destiny in mind. And so I believe that our personality types are very much connected to our purpose. I've done a bit of work around looking at, if you use the disc, right? There's the disc, there's the Myers-Briggs. We use just a simple temperament test that looks at choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholies, and really been able to correlate what gift sets, what spiritual gift sets are usually prevalent based on your temperament. And so when we're talking about pioneers and builders, those are generally, right? Nothing is ever like 100%. Those are going to be the melancholies, which are the intuitives, which sometimes people don't think people with a melancholy or quieter demeanor or introvert, if you'd rather use that word, are leaders or apostles, but they're actually some of the greatest leaders, even when you look in corporate, right? And then you, of course, have the obvious charismatic, dominant personalities that generally people think of them as leaders. But you can see how both of those temperaments have sets of gifts, spiritual gifts, as well as natural gifts that will incline them towards leadership. So I think that it's
Hmm.
very much connected. I think that God wires us intentionally, what we're good at, what drives us, and there's so many ways to look at it. You can look at internal motivation versus external. Different temperaments and personalities are driven by certain things, and so I don't. People are like, leaders can be made, and I believe it in a sense, but they have to want to be made, right? They have to
Mm.
want to have this eternal drive. But the apostles, the prophets, they're really apostolic prophets, because not all apostles are administrative and leadership. I think there's a lot that's more nature than nurture.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. There's that. I've asked that similar question before. Do you think leaders are born or made? And I
Mhm.
do think it's some combination of both for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I'm not as familiar with that personality typing that you're talking about. With the say something more
Yeah.
about the melancholy
Yeah.
type of personality.
Yeah, so we give this test all the time because it's open to the public, it's open source. You don't have to be trained to do it. It's just the four temperaments. And, just kind of like with all the other temperaments, research looking, has evolved it over the years. But you have the melancholy temperament, which most of us have. We have two temperaments that are that make us up, right? So you're probably a chloric melancholy, which is what my husband is, and melancholies are generally very thoughtful. They're very, they take a while to make a decision, but once they've made it, they're very committed to it. They're very detail oriented. They love really, really deep. It takes a time, some time for them to open up, but when they do, they're really in there. But they can obsess over perfection, and they can struggle with faith because they want to take a risk, but they don't have everything lined up, and so they don't know if they're going to be able to take that risk. So those are some of the melancholy traits. Most of my best friends, and like I said, my husband has that trait. My husband also has a chloric trait, which is my trait as well. So chloric sanguine. So we tell couples when we do premarital counseling and everything, generally you want, when you're looking at a spouse, to have one temperament that is the same. And then the Lord generally will put you with somebody who has total opposite temperaments. And I say so that it can perfect you, so it can make you more like him, right?
Yeah.
So both my husband and I are chlorics, which are very driven people, can be domineering, are very checklist, big vision, go, 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 right? But then on the other hand, I'm a sanguine, which is, love to be the center of attention, artistic, creative, colorful, which is very opposite of the melancholy, right? Which is, I always joke, melancholies can wear white and never get a stain on them. And me, the sanguine is like, it's a mess, right? So that's just kind of how it has showed up. And we actually use that to train our leaders as well as one of the initial tests to see how they function.
Yeah, so interesting. Cool. That's really neat. Thank you for sharing that. That was one of the last questions I put on the list. I'm glad I asked it because that's fascinating. I love thinking about that kind of stuff. Hey, I want to talk more about pioneering. I want to pull on the thread of apostolic ministry.
Yeah.
You've kind of brought that up a few times. We talked a little bit about that on the podcast, but I think when you start looking at the biblical definitions, I think that's what you begin to see is the idea of being an apostle or apostolic ministry. But I want to do some of that in part 2 here.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure we have plenty of time for that. And before we shift over to the second part, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your business and your ministry. I know you have a lot of resources, you have a lot of products and different things that I'm sure you've already piqued some people's interest even in this conversation. So just share a little bit about what you have to offer if people kind of want to glean from your resources.
Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. So one of the best ways is just following on socials. It's Faith and then Wokoma, Wokoma. And then our website is AskDrFaith.com. As we were talking about the characteristics of the pioneer, I was thinking specifically about my book Marked, which kind of gives, 22 ways to know that you're marked and set apart. So if you follow us anywhere, you'll see all of the amazing things that we have coming up, some free webinars that we're teaching in this coming year, as well as some strategy sessions in January to help ministers and businesses get focused for the year. So they'll be showing up.
Wonderful. Cool. Well, we'll put the link down in the description, down in the show notes, so people can connect with you. And I assume you'll do a 2025 Pioneers gathering.
Oh, yes,
is that true?
Yes. We try to do a second week in November.
So we'll keep that on the radar as well. And guys, we're going to keep going and want to invite you to tune in to part 2, which the link will be down in the description for that as well. And that will be exclusively for our paid subscribers. And so if you'd like to get twice as much podcast content, as well as some exclusive access to articles, discounts on books and things like that, you can become a paid subscriber. And that's the reason we're able to produce this podcast and offer you the free resources is because of our amazing paid subscribers. Dr. Faith, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.